That day in December I sat down by Miss Muffet of Montgomery. I was myriad weary, feet swole from sewing seams on a filthy fabric, tired sore a peddling the rusty singer. Hello and welcome back to Litcast. Today we'll be looking at Miz Rosa Rides the Bus by Angela Jackson. There is plenty of context for Miss Rosa Rides the Bus by Angela Jackson, and this context can really help you understand some of the references and help perhaps add some detail and depth to your line level analysis. So let's start with a little bit of historical context and the Jim Crow laws in the US. So this poem is set during the era of the Jim Crow laws. You have probably learnt about these in school already, but these laws enforced racial segregation, and they essentially disenfranchised African Americans politically and economically by restricting their access to public facilities, and that includes buses. So the reference to Jim Crow connects to the racist caricature Jump Jim Crow, and also a system built to legally enforce inequality. This is really important because sitting on a bus was not a neutral act. It was a legally regulated racial boundary. And the poem reflects the everyday oppression, not just the isolated event. The poem itself was published in 1998, but it revisits this period of American history as it is such a crucial moment and time in shaping racial identity and memory long after the segregation laws themselves were removed. So if we think now about some of the literary context, and Angela Jackson in particular, Angela Jackson is known for writing about things like social injustice and personal struggle and exploring strength found in ordinary lives. This poem in particular appeared in her collection And All These Roads Be Luminous in 1998. And she focuses on a fictional but representative black working woman and the emotional weight of the discrimination. Rather than focusing on a famous historical figure, Jackson decides to give voice to a working class seamstress, which suggests that the resistance, far from simply being iconic moments from people that we now know from history, this resistance belongs to many unnamed women and people. So in terms of social context, Miss Rosa is introduced first as this very hard worker and seamstress, and the emphasis on sewing shows economic hardship and generational labour, and also mending and endurance. Black women historically worked in domestic or manual labour roles and were often exploited economically. And the poem makes clear that her exhaustion is both physical and historical, and oppression operates not just in those dramatic moments, but in the daily survival of existing. So let's think about some of the big ideas in the poem. So as I mentioned, resistance is a fairly major theme and it pops up regularly. So this poem really challenges the idea that resistance has to be loud and brash. Miss Rosa does not shout, she does not deliver a speech, she simply sits and rides again. There is no loud protest in her actions, and her calm tone actually makes her strength more powerful. And through this, Jackson potentially suggests that resistance can be steady and internal, and dignity itself can be revolutionary. And the structure of the poem supports this as well. The free verse mirrors the kind of natural speech of someone just kind of talking, and the tone also remains controlled even during the violence. So there isn't an emotional shift there to anger or dismay or anything that would imply that there was a big emotional reaction from this character. Exhaustion is there as well as this sort of historical weight. The phrase myriad weary, myriad meaning lots and lots and lots, usually of people or things, suggests that there's exhaustion there beyond one day, almost like a lifetime of fatigue. And her physical pain of swollen feet and sore eyes also reflects there that economic struggle, but it also suggests that there's perhaps an emotional or generational weariness of the situation. And the poem shows that oppression is cumulative, so it builds over time, and her tiredness is not weakness, quite the opposite. It's evidence of her endurance and her resistance and her resilience in this situation. We've also got this idea of identity and selfhood. So the poem strongly explores identity. Miz Rosa dreams of her silk self, silk contrasting with filthy fabric. And silk, being this luxurious material, represents dignity, softness, and aspiration, because silk is very expensive. Her decision to remain seated reclaims her sense of self. She asserts there, I matter. And the poem suggests that identity is not just internal, it is instead performed publicly. Where she sits becomes a declaration of who she is. We also have the journey as this kind of extended metaphor. So the bus ride is both a literal journey and a symbolic journey. It represents movement towards justice and progress through hardship. Even after being removed, I rode again, which suggests that despite the violence, there's still this forward motion. There's still this emotional resilience. The journey is not triumphant. Instead, it is ongoing, and that in itself is an act of endurance and resistance. There's also this sense of disappointment and disillusionment. When she says it was not like they all say, it suggests history is often simplified and romanticised, and she's challenging these romanticised narratives that we're often given. The poem presents no dramatic applause and no instant change. It's not a big turnabout moment. This is the real everyday life of someone having to deal with this situation. Instead, it's showing that violence, it's showing that isolation, and ultimately a continued injustice. So being resilient, containing your emotions and maintaining your dignity ultimately doesn't lead to that major change, but it keeps you clear about who you are and what you stand for. The change is slow, and this really does reflect the slow and painful nature of social change, and the fact that you can change laws, but it's not going to change people's attitudes immediately. And then we've got faith and moral strength. So the closing line of this poem, I fast and pray and ride, suggests spiritual resilience. It suggests moral conviction. And when she's told to eat and be satisfied, it's almost like this idea of society demanding compliance, demanding her to conform. And her refusal to be satisfied shows her moral clarity. She's clear about what she wants, and it's not this. And then therefore that suggests hope that is rooted in belief rather than the circumstances she is in. Ultimately, this poem is suggesting that resistance is not always dramatic. Through the exhaustion, the labour and the quiet return to the bus, Jackson is showing here that dignity itself becomes this act of rebellion. And the bus journey symbolises not just movement, but endurance. And even in disappointment, there is resilience. So that was a whirlwind tour of the context and some of the big ideas in Miz Rosa Rides the Bus by Angela Jackson. We will be exploring the context and the big ideas of all the poems in the anthology before returning to each of them in turn for some line-by-line analysis to aid with revision. By no means are these episodes completely comprehensive, but hopefully they'll give you that little bit of a boost of confidence ready for your Unit 1 exam in the summer. Thank you so much for listening. And if you found this podcast useful, then please share it with other people and be sure to leave some feedback as well. All of our episodes are free at point of use, but if you wish to support us further, then there is a Ko-fi link in the description so you can tip us. Additional funds go to a range of good causes as well. Thank you so much again for listening, and I will see you in the next one. for listening to Litcast, the podcast for GCSE and A-level revision. The music that you hear in this episode is called Galaxy and was written by Ixon, and you can find the rest of his music on SoundCloud. If you found the podcast helpful and would like to support us further, then the Ko-fi link in the description will give you an opportunity to tip us. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you in the next one.